some. And I have to say, despite my many years of looking at all sorts of photography, I did find some of them hard to look at. Maybe I'm particularly squeamish. I don't particularly like Casualty on the telly, so this was certainly another level on from that. But do you think there was a line to be drawn with that kind of imagery, or can you go as far as you need?
Well, number one, you're describing them as quite graphic, and that was a big issue in the editing of the book, and the way I put it together is also an exhibition, and it's been published in a number of magazines, so the same issues cropped up again and again. Basically, and what I realised is that the pictures weren't that bad.
Okay.
People reacted to them very strongly.
Yeah.
And I actually edited some of them out because I just felt they were unnecessary.
Right.
But what was interesting was that in Gun Nation there were very graphic images. Not a lot, you know, there's a lot of portraits. That was the other thing about both of these projects. And I'll just go backwards a bit, is that they mixed very formal portraiture, shot with lighting and a studio camera, but shot on location, with sort of detail shots, again quite carefully composed, and shot almost like kind of product shots from an advert, mixed with quite sort of hard-hitting reportage, documentary-style images. And what was interesting to me about the project was that kind of mixture of styles, and the way that one made you feel very different about the next one. So there was a picture of an elderly couple holding a gun, very sweet, like a family portrait. But the next image in the book was the incredibly graphic image of the floor of an emergency room in a hospital, just absolutely smattered in blood all over the floor and up the walls. And it was the juxtaposition of the images that was interesting.
So it's as much to do with the follow-through of the layout and the actual storytelling of the images once you're bringing them together into the finished book, as much as the images in themselves.
Exactly. And then to answer your question about the graphic nature in London,
Can everybody hear us okay? Yeah, you can hear us. Sorry about that. Go on. I have to talk right into it.
Basically...
Yeah. Can everybody hear okay? You can hear Zed Nelson? Oh, hang on. No.
Yeah, I mean, number one, I did an edit. I decided it didn't need to be too graphic. Number two, it was interesting to see, like, there was an image in the book of somebody having a tummy tuck. And what that sounds like is a very gentle surgical procedure where they remove a little bit of fat from your stomach. The image is quite incredible, and it looks like a sort of dolphin being cut open, like one of these awful fisherman images you see on the beach. And it is kind of shocking to behold. And I felt that that needed to be in the book. But there's only 5 images, anything remotely like that in the whole project. But those were very important as a reminder of how far we'll go to change our body.
And when you're working on these projects, how do you actually take the project from being an initial idea to being a finished book? I mean, who's funding that? Are you self-funding it? Are you getting interest from publishers? And if so, how do you get people on board? Because it's not an obvious sell, is it?
No. Gun Nation, nobody was really interested in. People felt like, oh, you know, we've seen stories about Americans and guns before. It was a very hard sell. It sounded like the cliche that I was trying to explode, really. So that was entirely self-funding. Probably cost £10,000.
Right.
I did actually get a magazine interested in it halfway through in France. And I shot that one in black and white, and they said, oh, you know, we love this, we want you to reshoot it in colour, and we want to assign this journalist to work with you.
Right.
And he was a member of the Paris Gun Club and a great gun enthusiast.
So that didn't really work.
No, it just felt absurd, so I turned that down and carried on. And the project really did work well in the end. I mean, as I said, it sold to a lot of different magazines. It became a sort of travelling exhibition, published as a book. So it was sort of successful in terms of the project paying for itself. But also it was a gamble. You know, it could have been £10,000 out of pocket. And I funded that with commercial work. I would do the odd sort of corporate shoot. And I quite enjoyed making corporate Britain and America pay for a book that really heavily criticised corporations and advertising and the whole sort of setup. Love Me was even more difficult in a way because it was shot in 17 different countries over a period of 5 years. So, whereas in America it was shot all in America, Gun Nation was all in America, so the costs were more sort of controllable. Love Me became a very expensive project to do, so I funded that by essentially working on one sort of chapter or part of the book and selling that to a magazine as a story. Or
when you say you're selling these to a magazine, what kind of magazines are you selling these pictures to? Because there was a time when there were a lot of magazines that would take your kind of work, but that's becoming harder and harder, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think the magazines are still there. I think the budgets have got smaller at the moment, which is difficult, and there's less of a sort of philosophy of taking gambles and going out into the world and sort of, I don't know, really pushing the boat out. So it is harder, but the magazines, it might be the Guardian Weekend magazine or the Sunday Times, or might be an issue if it's something to do with women that Marie Claire would be interested in. So it could be a whole range of different mainstream magazines.
Are you selling those yourself, or do you have an agent who's doing that for you, or a publisher?
During the time of Love Me, I was working on my own. I joined an agency about 6 months after I'd finished it, just because I'd been with an agency years ago, then I'd been freelance again for about 7 years. And it's quite a sort of lonely world being a freelance. It's kind of nice to be attached to an agency with other photographers.
Yeah.
But the downsides are they take a huge percentage of what you earn every sale.
What kind of percentage have you got? 20, 25%?
No, 50.
50%?
Yeah, so if they sell a story, that's it. You'll lose 50% of the income,
from that, yeah.
which at a time like this, where, as I say, their budgets